Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Telegram, and Facebook. You can support me on Subscribestar, buy me a coffee, locals, and also check out my Substack. So, Logos and I are finally back to our old bread and butter, reading actual Moldbug. We've been doing summaries, interviews, and now we're back to the old bread and butter. Not Ron Paul, meant just Moldbug, January 10th, 2008. Yes, I'm sorry. We're suspending actual content here at UR for a brief Ron Paul fest. If you're itching for more monetary red meat, I cross swords here with a friendly Australian banker and discuss the silver market here, courtesy of the great financial ninja Macro Man. Also, I will be traveling this week, even more unavailable than usual. Please don't hesitate to send me an email anyway. I will answer it all, at least at some point. Okay, that was that. Question for Arnold Kling, Megan McCardle. Will Wilkinson and all other Beltway libertarians. Okay. Mentions Moldbug, January the 16th, 2008. A fascinating new blogger who calls himself former Beltway wonk pops up with a handy new term, the Orange Line Mafia. Note to FBW, James Kirchick's name contains two C's. Mafia is perhaps a little harsh, and surely the implication which FBW, in all fairness, does not make, but perhaps implies that while Fair Paul was in some way coordinated, perhaps it's some DuPont circle version of the bada bing is incorrect. When sharks do their shark frenzy feeding thing, it's not like there's some shark capo in the background telling them where and when to rip off huge chunks of flesh. The only coordinated signal is blood in the water, and we've seen your nose for that, at least when it comes to Blut and Bowden and its Emilianastic morph. Needs no sharpening. But I like Orange Line Tag. I fear it will stick. And so, dear ladies and gentlemen, given your rather vehement views on the Ron Paul controversy, I'm curious as to how you might answer the following question. Please feel free to respond to all, none, or some, or more. Which is worse, racism or socialism? Why? 1. 2, can you imagine living in a world in which socialism is politically incorrect? In other words, in which any comment which even hinted that socialism might be a good idea instantly reminded the listener of the Holodomor and exposes the commenter to social ostracism, professional destruction, civil and perhaps criminal liability. Define crime think. Do you find this concept useful? Do you believe that it should apply to racism, socialism, neither or both? 4, which government was the worst, the Soviet Union under Stalin or the Republic of South Africa under P.W. Botha? Why? 5, who knows more about human genetics, you or Francis Crick? Discuss. 6, do you believe that intellectuals such as yourself should write and debate under the theory that American public opinion is generally right until proven wrong? How do you reconcile this with the fact that American public opinion generally sees libertarians such as yourself as a bunch of freaks, cranks, and nutcases? Do you consider changing this perception the primary objective of your efforts? Does this ever conflict with just saying what you think, and if so, which wins? 7, do you find the term Beltway libertarian at all pejorative? If so, with what term would you prefer to describe yourselves? Would responsible libertarian do? If so, do you find anything odd in the fact that so many responsible libertarians work for the U.S. government or institutions it sponsors? 8, do you agree or disagree with this quote from Georgy Arbatov? I pay tribute to the courage and fearlessness of those who, like Andrei Sakharov, risked taking an uncompromising stand. These people were heroes, even martyrs. And if they had not done what they did, I think the changes in our country would not have gone forward so quickly. But had it not been for the many hundreds and thousands who worked inside the system, fought routine skirmishes, tried to stop the pressure of Stalinist conservatism, and defend and promoted the ideas of democracy and peaceful economic reform, the process of revitalization would not have been possible at all. 9, do you expect that if the present American system of government is defeated by a libertarian movement, you will find yourself like Arbatov, perceived as a spokesman at best and today at worst of the regime? And best toady at worst of the regime? Or do you expect to be praised and fettered for your work inside the system? 10, do you ride the orange line to work? Update, Arnold Kling, who did take a couple of bites of the whale, but I have to admit that doesn't really fit the profile, supplies his answers. Wilkinson's are in the comments. Well, comments aren't here. Is this? Oh, Okay, he does. We can get to that later. He does answer. So before we read the answers, I guess yeah. Do we want to answer these logos just as exercise?
Sorry, I couldn't find my mouse cursor. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, which is worse, racism or socialism? Why? Um, I mean, I'm still gonna say socialism. I mean, I still don't want to see state socialism like Mao or Stalin ever again.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on this one in a sense because socialism means so many different things to so many different people, right? Like,
That's the problem.
yeah, like there is a meme with some truth to it that's just like socialism is when government, and like that's the meme.
Mhm.
And if that's the broad definition people are going to take as socialism, then like anything that's not Encapistan is socialistic. Then I'm sorry, racism is worse because I'd rather not be an anarchist failed state. If you are going to take the totalitarian kind of socialism as the definition, like government control over everything, then okay, socialism is worse. It's like a definition of two magical words. Like which magical word is worse?
Well,
Well,
the
it
other thing
depends on
is,
the wizard casting the word.
it also yes, it depends, and also what is racism, right? Because that's
Yeah, equivalently, yes.
do you mean Mr. Mustache, or do you mean denying you're a racist?
Right. Yeah, color blindness. Exactly.
So which is it? Yeah, it's a trick
Yeah, it's
question.
tough.
Okay, so two. Yes, I could imagine two.
Yeah, I mean, that would be I mean, there's parts of America where that's just true. I mean, if you live in some regions of the South that aren't like super hyper urban,
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure that everybody there sees socialism as a dirty word. And so we can just imagine that was just the case for everywhere. There's no logical contradiction in doing so.
No, yeah, you could easily do that.
Yeah.
Define crime. Think. Do you find this concept useful? Should it apply to races? Okay. In the sense in which I think Moldbug is using this, or the expected use, I would say no, it's not useful. Um,
Yeah.
it's it's another. I think the earlier term we're looking for is wrong think. That was from 1984.
No, I think he's something thinking of something different here. I think this goes back to the shark metaphor he said above. I think crime think is kind of like the signal you give to another group of people that it's all time to commit a crime together.
Oh, that. Okay, so it's like stochastic terrorism or something.
Kinda. Stochastic terrorism is where you just put something out in the ether, not even intending anything bad to
Oh, I
happen,
see. Okay.
but then randomly somebody takes off with it. This is where you put a signal out to the ether. It's basically like a dog whistle. But more than a dog whistle, it's more like a coordination dog whistle, where it's just like, I'm gonna dog whistle at this thing and we're gonna do crime on it together.
Yeah, four. Stalin. That's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the joke, right? Blacks were still immigrating into South Africa under PW Botha. Nobody
Right.
was immigrating to Soviet Russia.
Hmm.
Some idealists maybe, but mostly no. Five is irrelevant for our purposes. Uh, Six. American public opinion is created by Wall Street. I mean, so that's a moot question. Going back to Noam Chomsky and manufacturing consent. So I just say it's a moot. Of course they're wrong because it's Wall Street propaganda.
Well, also looking at 5 and 6 in the abstract, what I think he's trying to do here is come at libertarians because he's responding to a blog post, and I think what's going on here is this guy is trying to say that he's responding to in some capacity, um, that there's some I think he's trying to make like a universalist libertarian argument that like
Mm,
there's some fundamental intuition that a bunch of people share that X, Y, and Z. He might even be making a Michael Humer argument. I don't know if Michael Humer was big in this era, but um, and the idea is that there's a fundamental intuition that people have about economic policy, about this, that, and the other, and basically that should be capitalized on. And because he's responding to a quote called the Orange Line Mafia, and I'm guessing there's some kind of technocratic use of mafia going on. We'd have to read the post for me to see for sure, but I'm trying to like glimpse the meaning behind the questions. And so this is really a fundamental question of technocracy versus the fundamental intuitions of the populace. on the one hand, you're right, like consent is manufactured all the time, Wall Street, so on and so forth. But imagine like the negation of this. Let's suppose we assume that people's opinions are guilty until proven innocent. This is basically like how the left is operating in this country currently in current year.
Mm-hmm.
So both ways going to be pretty terrible. I think the answer is going to be gray.
Yeah. 7, do you find the term Beltway at all pejorative? I generally think that's pejorative. I use it that way.
Yeah, but we're not libertarians. I don't know.
Yeah, I know we're not libertarians. I guess so. As far as 8, I guess you could disagree with Georgy Arbatov in one of two ways: his sort of subjective moral feeling about Andrei Sakharov, and his statement about praxis, how society was changed. His statement about praxis, I believe, is true. That's just how the Soviet Union was changed. I'm also inclined to believe with his moral consensus. The Soviet Union was terrible. So what do you have to say about 8?
Not much more than you, I think.
9, do you expect? Okay.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, 9 is a good question. Well, he does answer it, so I guess we'll just skip that and then look at 10 and here the orange line to work. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the answers, and he's doing it in reverse order. 10, I do not ride the orange line to work. I have no office. Cato paid me a small amount in 2005 and 2006 when I was writing Crisis of Abundance, but not since. I support myself on the basis of past earnings, primarily from a fortuitously timed internet venture. I live in Wheaton, Maryland, about a mile from the Red Line, which I use on average about once a month to attend an event downtown at AEI or Cato. 9.
Okay, we just stopped there. I just can't help but keep noticing the pattern, whether it's in the early 2000s to 2010s. Every libertarian I seem to run into, especially a big one, fortuitously makes a bunch of earnings on the basis of capital gains and seemingly just has some major stake in defending their capital gains. I mean, tell me that's not a pattern.
Tyler Cowen was like that too, I think, because Tyler Cowen comes up. No, yeah, I know. Libertarianism is just a polylogism for people that have money. It's not the only polylogism that people that have money can have, but it's one. So yeah, I agree. 9, if the present American system is replaced by a libertarian movement, I will be viewed as someone who pretty much accepted the system rather than took radical action against it. My guess is that if people are denouncing me as a toady, then we will not be living in a libertarian regime, but some reign of terror phase of revolution. I don't think so. I mean, social media, people call each other names all the time.
Well, that, and he's presupposing that under a libertarian society, there would be no such thing as corporate tyranny.
Of course not. Of course not.
Yeah.
8, I do not know enough about the internal dynamics of the Soviet system to know whether its fall was due to the actions of uncompromising opponents, those who worked within the system for change, both or neither. 7, I consider myself an uncertain libertarian like Tyler Cowen. I praise uncertainty. I also praise libertarianism. Hold on, what was 7 again? Beltway, okay. 6, I think the beliefs of the mass public in America are often wrong, so are the beliefs of many intellectuals. I'm willing to speak out against anyone's conventional beliefs. I'm used to having my views announced by ordinary people, intellectuals and libertarians. Wait a minute! If he's used to having his views denounced by libertarians, then being called a toady, probably by another libertarian, is not the sign of a red terror. Right?
Yep.
I think that if I ever am physically assaulted for my beliefs, I will be for my skepticism on global warming, but so far, fears for my physical safety are not sufficient to cause concern. 5, I know less about human genetics than someone who has actually taken a modern biology course. 4, I believe the Soviet Union did more harm than the apartheid regime of South Africa, but the Soviet Union arguably did more harm than any government in history, including the German government that murdered some of my relatives in the 1940s. 3, I do not like the notion of thought crimes. 2, I can imagine a world in which people are ostracized for believing in socialism. I can imagine a world in which people are ostracized for believing in any of the state romanticizing faiths. I think that if this form of ostracism were severe, it would strike me as non-libertarian, which might raise questions about ends versus means, but that's pretty hypothetical to aggress. See, that's strange, right? The Mises crowd loves ostracism. Remember Hapa and the Covenants? So I don't know. Maybe the Mises crowd aren't really libertarian after all. It's difficult to compare socialism with racism in terms of harm. Okay, well, we went through that. Is there anything that you wanted to say about his responses to Moldbug?
Not particularly. Kind of wishy-washy. It reminds me of some of the stuff I heard on the Blaze Summit last night, but I'm not going to digress too much into that.
Haha, LOL. How to actually defeat the U.S. government. Oh, here we go, Logos. You ready? You ready for a non-answer at the end? The actual defeat the U.S. government part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see it.
Let's see it. Let's see that non-defeat the government. Mentions Moldbug, January the 17th, 2008. In part one, we established that electing Ron Paul, even if it was possible, is not a practical way to convert USG into a libertarian institution. This is because the policies of USG are not set by its politicians, but by its permanent civil service, which tends to prevail in any conflict between the two. No, Logos, the policies of the USG are set by Wall Street. I mean, this isn't going to get any easier, is it?
No.
I mean, anybody who's been watching my Sutton series knows how much Wall Street was controlling things as early as World War I.
Oh, yeah.
The permanent civil service is much larger than it looks. It is best defined as everyone involved in setting and implementing USG's policies. When we realize that this includes the press, the universities, and the NGO sphere, the brilliant Richard North of the EU referendum, one of the few bloggers who really understands how the modern state works and has not been physically shattered by the awful truth, describes a typical rat's nest of EU NGOs here. We start to realize why the battle plays out as it does. Funny how they implement the implementation of ideas doesn't come from, corporate donors. What do you know, Logos?
Right.
What do you know? Civil servants defeat politicians because no politician or political appointee can harm any civil servant's career, since civil servants, in the broad sense defined above, command numerous levers of public opinion, such as on the schools, the universities, and the press. The converse is not the case. The result is that the politicians either become house-trained or lose their jobs, or subsist in tiny backward niches whose voters couldn't give a damn what the Times thinks, e.g. Ron Paul's district. An excellent way to describe any system is to outline its fringes. A fine example of an entity on the fringe of the polygon, but still within it, is the Cato Institute. Somewhere I had gotten the idea that Cato accepts government funds, but in fact it does not. Its main sponsor is, of course, billionaire Charles Koch. Wait, Logos, I thought money doesn't have power, and I thought money doesn't influence people. How does that work?
Yeah, it's all spontaneous. Academia does all the influencing. Fads are king.
I think Will Wilkinson for the correction, but when you compare Cato's homepage to that of the Liberal Brookings Institute, a classic Beltway bandit, I think you can see how I was confused. I think an alien who understood English could eventually figure out the substantive difference between Cato and Brookings, but it would have to be one pretty sharp alien. When we look at the homepage of the Ludwig von Mises Institute, which will be on the orange line just as soon as the metro extends out to Alabama, we can see the difference. The purpose of LVMI is to propagate ideas. The purpose of Cato is to impact policy, i.e. to wield power. Power, of course, can be wielded for good as for ill, but Tolkien knew something about that. I like Brookings' motto, quality, independence, impact. If anyone in Washington would sacrifice the third of the first two, 10 others were ready to take his place. Impact is the true currency of DC. The social status of Beltway corresponds directly to his impact. I suspect this is the real reason that LVMI is in Alabama. It has no impact and hence no power. And its employees would constantly feel humiliated and scorned like nerds at a jock party. This might not affect LVMI's mission, but it might be distracting. Besides, Alabama is really cheap. What Cato sacrifices for its impact is that this set of ideas it can propagate is by any serious historical standard enormously narrow. As we've seen in L'Affaire Paul, the great fear that haunts the Catonians at night is the fear of losing their legitimacy. Their impact would go with it. DC has no pity for cranks and crackpots. The result is a school of thought that can fairly be characterized as pro-government libertarianism. Sadly, we have no reason to think that this Schlesingerian vital center has any correlation whatever whatsoever with reality. The center defines itself in political terms, not intellectual terms. It is the belief of the average voter. Since the civil service invents most of its energy in managing public opinion, also known as manufacturing consent. Logos. He uses the word. You keep using that word, but I do not think it means what you think it means. Right, Logos?
Well, he might. I mean, the guy that did the video about us the other day actually attributed manufacturing consent correctly to the left when he used the phrase, so plausibly Moldbug does too. Plausibly,
okay. The outcome is quite clear. As the center drifts inexorably leftward, fueled by nothing more than the raw personal ambition of the thousand Brookingsites, the likes of Cato must drift with it or be excluded from policymaking process. Cato has minimal cognitive independence unless, of course, it confines itself to today's good thing. This is why we see the level of raw hatred and arrogance that the Orange Line Mafia aims at its redneck rivals. Progressives can be debated with. Paleoconservatives are dangerous cranks who must be ostracized. Cato regularly features progressive essays on its Cato Unbound series. You will never see an LVMI paleo there, let alone a racist like Jared Taylor. And if you did, the progressives would vanish at once, as would the impact the invisible procession goes by. Okay, now this is actually really interesting here, right? Because LouRockwell.com, which has a lot of the same writers that are on Ludwig von Mises Institute, actually had essays from Jared Taylor, and they've been deleted. so they did what Moldbug is accusing the Cato Institute of doing.
Oh no.
I know, right? Somebody wants to be relevant, Logos. Now, granted, this was 2008. There was an article from VDare called The Strange Death of Paleo-Libertarianism sometime in like the late Obama years, I think it was written, where the Mises crowd pivoted from paleo-conservatism to a kind of somewhat more, not progressive, but in their rhetoric, it was more amenable to a left-wing audience.
Mm-hmm.
So this change had either not yet happened or would soon happen. So we can't blame Moldbug for not knowing that. Whereas the cranks over at LouRockwell.com, and there's a lot of serious craziness and pure stupidity that appears there on a daily basis, can think and say whatever the hell they want. Defend the Confederacy, why not? Probably nobody at Cato wants to defend the Confederacy, but in their hearts, they know that even if they wanted to, they couldn't. And this has got to burn. I mean, how long has Jeff Davis been dead? What sensible person could possibly care? How can you carry around an emotional attachment to a 150-year-old world? Talk about lunacy. Well, Logos, people still have it attached to that war. Now it's 170 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The real sad thing is that the Orange Liners can only feel like they have impact because DC, being utterly sclerotic and impossible to change, has defined impact down to levels derisory to anyone outside the bubble. On Cato's impact page, they list precisely one success: school vouchers in Washington, D.C. Well, knock me over with a feather, but really, by Beltway standards, this is not bad for 30 years and $100 million, especially when the product you have to push is an inherently nasty and pointless one like small government. It's hard to sign people up for abolishing their own jobs. So the whole Cato disaster provides yet another example of a strategy which cannot possibly succeed in reforming the USG. The Cato-LVMI divide has been described as the Stalin-Trotsky split of libertarianism. The ugly truth is that neither Stalinist Orange Line libertarians nor Trotskyite Ron Paul revolution has any chance of affecting the USG in any significant way. The stunning yet obvious answer is that we have no reason at all to think that the USG can be reformed in anything like a libertarian direction. It is a highly stable system in which all changes tend to be expansive. It shares this quality with all institutions controlled by their own employees. In the immortal words of Arthur Conan Doyle, when we have eliminated the impossible, we are left with the improbable. No, that's not what Doyle said. It's a quote from Sherlock Holmes where he says, once you've eliminated the impossible, whatever is left, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. Mm-hmm. I guess that's close enough. Therefore, if USG cannot be reformed by either political or institutional methods, it cannot be reformed at all. If despite this we consider it harmful, we have accepted the need not to reform it, but to defeat it. The fundamental... Wait, Logos. Are we here to defeat the USG or to make it so efficient that it wins? I'm confused.
Well, he could be saying, like, if I were a libertarian and I wanted to defeat it, here's how I'd do it.
Well,
He could. Let's hear him out. Let's hear him out.
the fundamental case for defeating USG is that the USG was established to serve the interests of its citizens. If you were a USG citizen, you agree that USG, as it does not serve our interests, and you agree that it cannot be reformed to do so, you are at least ready to support defeating it. In any means whose collateral damage does not exceed the disservice done by USG are acceptable. This is a straightforward strategic problem, and we can solve it as such. First and foremost, you can support defeating USG without wishing for a state of wild Somalian anarchy in North America, because we are lucky enough to have a backup system of government, the states. The obvious and straightforward result of defeating USG is to dissolve the Union, as Michael Roseff proposes here, and return sovereignty to the 50 states. Probably the existing military should be retained as a continental defense force. Otherwise, independent states could relate to each other much as the US and Canada do now. There are enormous numbers of details to be resolved in any such proposal. In general, the states should assume the financial obligations of USG, even its informal entitlements. No one's Social Security or Medicare need be cut off. Central institutions will be necessary for a few years to ensure an orderly liquidation. To be safe, they should probably be located outside the watershed of the Potomac. And they should probably transition ASAP to an employee set untainted by service with USG or its various tentacles. Is there any guarantee that state government will be more libertarian than federal government? Not at all, unless we go all the way to neoliberalism. But state government in a decentralized North America would at least be subject to serious jurisdictional competition. There would be free competition for desirable citizens on the basis of good customer service. This should put a serious boost of genuine market energy behind libertarian government. Said product is not one most people think they want to know, but I suspect that seeing it would change their minds. If you are a libertarian or anything like it, and believe that 10 years after the abolition of Washington, there would be even the slightest shred of affectionate nostalgia for the old Potomac beast, I think you have a serious case of cognitive dissonance. I'm quite confident that the reaction would be, why did we put up with that for so long? You know, I don't know if I believe that, Logos. I think there's a lot of like hangers-on and toadies that would miss the good old days.
I think so too.
Like, oh, I miss the good old days when I could just live off, everybody else's work for the government.
Yep.
There's going to be a lot of those people. If you are not so confident, any transition plan could include a 10 years later referendum on restoring DC from NRO to HUD, from DEA to NSF, etc., right down to the offices and positions. Of course, any such restoration would have to retrieve its employees from the productive sector, where they might find that they actually enjoyed their work, but these two are details. I won't try to outline a transition plan in this post. Even just how to deal with the US dollar is a problem that deserves its own essay, if not its own blog. I hope you'll just accept the lesson of history that change happens and that it often looks just as inevitable in the past tense as improbable in the future. The critical problem is, can we make it happen, and if so, how? All right, well, he's given us at least a plausible plan to implement, which is this is basically very libertarian. A lot of the Mises people have said something much like this.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing is, how are you going to get the federal government to dissolve itself to the states? Like, how is that going to happen?
Right.
I don't see that. Of course, we have to consider the possibility that defeating USG is simply impossible. Perhaps the thing is just eternal. In that case, far better to roll over and think of England. Still, history does not record any eternal regimes, nor does it record any regimes that saw themselves as anything but. If UR has convinced its readers of anything, I hope it has convinced one or two people to actually believe in history, at least as more than a series of hoarded crimes gradually vanquished by reason and prosperity. On the face of it, defeating USG seems even harder than reforming it. After all, we are looking at a country full of people who swore a sacred oath to USG 5 days a week for 12 months, for the 12 most formative years of their life. What kind of superpowers would we need to defeat that? I love the Bellamy salute. Note how in this picture the hand seems to be creeping around to the more anatomically natural Roman position. Thank you, Arthur Lippo. But so what? The same people believe in Social Security, the FDA, and aid to Nepal. Why should it be easier to change their minds partially than totally? If all you have is bare hands, it is easier to slice a watermelon or to smash it. Here at UR, we deal with sacred oath thing by shifting our words slightly. Instead of USG, we use the slightly more neutral WatchCore. This reminds us that USG is no more than a corporation in the strict sense of the word, i.e. an organization with a virtual identity. In a slightly more outre move, we translate the old Viking word for the USG's continent as plainland and subject plainlanders. It's basically just elves versus hobbits logos. This is just the elves versus the hobbits.
Yep.
Thus, rather than trying to free the U.S. from the evil clutches of USG, an almost oxymoronic task, we are trying to free plainland from WatchCorp. Man, it's amazing how nothing can all change. Like the whole hobbits elves thing, slightly different framing, but it's really all here.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps you remember how confused you were in high school when you read Hamlet and found Claudius being called Denmark. Did a little light bulb go off in your head when you realized how nice it is for a monarchy if its subjects use the same name, the same word for both king and country? And when you salute the flag that morning, which were you feeling? Warm ties of love and loyalty to Plainland, or warm ties of love and loyalty to WatchCore? These little Jedi mind tricks that hold the whole thing together. It's these little Jedi mind tricks that hold the whole thing together. They're small, but they add up. So all we have to do is liquidate WatchCore. Corporations are liquidated every single day. Hundreds of corporations are in liquidation as we speak. Typically, this happens because they are bankrupt. An adjective hard to define and an entity's liabilities are denominated in its own script, but one I often hear applied to WatchCore. But there's one big difference between liquidating WatchCore and liquidating Enron, which is that Enron didn't have the most powerful armed forces in the history of the world. To defeat WatchCore, we need to defeat its military. There are a number of plausible strategies of doing so, and none of them involves hunting rifles, Patrick Swayze, or IEDs. Clearly, to destroy WatchCore, we must capture it first. Oh, right, Logos, because if you want to destroy me and Mr. Mustache, you got to capture the German government first.
Of course.
Of course. And one of the patterns we're seeing is that the methods which work for a revolutionary capture of the state do not work for a reactionary capture of the state. This pattern is very consistent, and I'm pretty confident that anyone who ignores it is making a tremendous mistake. Yeah, I agree. Revolutionaries can make a bold for state power like Lenin or Mao, and it works. Reactionaries, in the video, were you in that video? Reactionaries always lose, Logos?
Maybe.
It's an old video. It's like 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
For example, one way to see the Cato Institute is to see it as a sort of libertarian Fabian society. Did Fabian or Gramscian tactics work as methods for socialists to capture the 19th century liberal state? Spectacularly. But they worked because they attracted a legion of smart, amoral careerists who saw their near infinite power and plunder that hypertrophied state would create. Cato has no such promise. All it has is coke and his wallet is fine. Libertarianism does not create jobs. Well, yeah, of course it does. And Moldbug says this all the time. They would just be working in the market sector.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, that's not really fair. I mean, look, I'm not here to defend libertarianism, but that's not really fair because the jobs would just be shifted to the market sector.
Yeah.
We see the same pattern when we consider guerrilla warfare against WatchCore, either of the classic Maoist royal form or the newer urban guerrilla terrorist approach, or simply the strategy of blending ominous and threatening paramilitias. These strategies work for leftist revolutionaries because they are essentially criminal in nature, and leftism, whose Yeatsian passionate strategy is inseparable from its capacity for pure plunder, is fundamentally a criminal movement. Well, it's too bad the Taliban didn't get the memo on this, Logo. Sorry, guys, it's not going to work. You're not leftists.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. For example, in the early 90s, as the Soviet Union collapsed, it became clear to many Americans that Washington was no picnic. Neither. I don't know that anyone took to the hills a la Patrick Swayze, unless you count Eric Rudolph, but perhaps you remember the militia movement of the period, which of course died a pathetic and probably well-deserved death after the Oklahoma City bombing. As you may remember, no one at the New York Times asked why do they hate us about Timothy McVeigh and his ilk. There was no sudden outpouring over the grievances of Agro-Americans. The general national consensus with which I basically agree was that the Oklahoma City bombers were sick, crazy rednecks, and they deserved to die. The militia movement sensed this feeling. It realized that it had no chance of victory, and it faded away. Okay, Logos. Okay, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, right? Okay. Now you had said in one of your the third video we did, summarizing 2007, that Moldbug says if the hobbits, the Plainlanders, whoever, if they win, he wouldn't want to live in the country. Or he doesn't even like them. Or he's a Brahmin.
Yep.
Now he's specifically talking about Timothy McVeigh here, but he says they were sick, crazy rednecks and they deserve to die. Is that kind of like mask off about what he feels about the hobbits?
Well, I mean, the Oklahoma City bomber actually killed people, and for that, I think Moldbug would say they deserve to die. But I think everybody else could at least be sick, crazy rednecks as far as Moldbug is concerned.
Well, I think he thinks they are. I mean, he said
Yeah.
that early on in his formalist essay, so he's kind of letting the mask off here. Okay,
Yep.
It's like, okay, Timothy McVeigh is a bad guy because he killed people, but he's also a bad guy because he came from this subculture.
Mm-hmm.
The subculture of people he's writing to. Terrorism proper is only half of an effective strategy for seizing power. The other half is an information campaign that convinces the victims of terrorism that they can alleviate it by making concessions, typically in the form of money, power, or both. This brings the terrorists closer to their objective, which recruits more terrorists. The final result is a criminal state led by the former terrorists who are now, of course, statesmen. This pattern is the origin of most of today's third world governments. The political side of the campaign was, of course, our good friend, the progressives. The result, do we need to go there? Not today, perhaps. When we look at reactionary terrorist movements in the post-war era, such as OAS, hold on a second, what is OAS? It doesn't go anywhere. AWB. Okay, South African movement. We see the same pathetic Timothy McVeigh pattern. The OAS has quite arguably been proved right. Arab rule in Algeria has been a murderous catastrophe. The AWB is perhaps in the process of being proved right. So what? They both got their asses kicked. Like all failed reactionary terrorists, they made the mistake of aggravating the true authorities without having the power to defeat them. As Machiavelli pointed out, if you strike at a king, aim to kill. Well, the thing is, but wait, Timothy McVeigh didn't target the true authorities.
No, he didn't.
He didn't. So, like, this doesn't even make sense. And again, Moldbug's just wrong. The guerrilla fighter wants the state to lash out because it's going to lash out in an indiscriminate fashion in order to that, and then those people can then be brought into the movement. Now, that's actual. Well, no. So if stochastic terrorism is where you just say things without having any intent, what if that was your intent? What do you call that?
Propaganda.
There you go. Pre-war reactionary terrorists such as the Nazis and the fascists succeeded because they formed an alliance with the rotting remnants of the ancient regime. The ancient regime is no more. Case closed. Stormfront kids, I love you for your passion, but really, why bother? Perhaps you could put all that energy into like getting a job or something. Well, okay, I just wouldn't call Nazis and fascists reactionaries. I mean, when I think of reactionaries, I think of like, the Russian whites or something.
There's a sense in which they were cultural reactionaries, but overall, yeah, you're right.
Well, I mean, the Nazis believed in the perfectibility of man through genetic engineering. I mean, that's still kind of like, if man can be perfected, I still consider that kind of lefty.
Well, that's true. Again, it's Moldbug. I don't think he means reactionary as like a right-wing conservative. I think he means reactionary as literally somebody reacting to a lot of fast cultural changes at the time.
Okay. Well, no, it's simple. Logos. The reason why the Nazis and Hitler and Mussolini won is they're the veterans, the World War I veterans that joined their ranks. These were men that knew how to fight. They were organized. They knew how to kill. Those kinds of men generally aren't joining these movements.
Right.
And without them, you can't pursue a policy of directed violence. If libertarians controlled the press, schools, and universities, libertarian paramilitary movements would be practical and effective. After every bomb went off, the Times could whine about how the root cause of libertarian terrorism is high taxes and Orwellian anti-terrorist measures, yada, yada. On the other hand, if libertarians controlled the press, schools, and universities, libertarian paramilitary movements would be unnecessary. We are left with the exactly one-time honored reactionary military measure, the military coup. Since in all states the military is the final court of appeals, whether they like it or not, a coup, contra Arnold Kling, is always an option whether you form whatever your form of government. Perhaps through a sort of vestigial anti-Latin prejudice, there is no thing plainlanders in or out of the military fear and loathe so much as a coup. On the other hand, if you read a lot of mill blogs, which I do, you'll start to notice that there's nothing plainland warfighters fear and loathe so much as washcorps. And they are especially unhappy about the center of its central nervous system, i.e. the official press. Since in all states the military is the final court of appeal, whether they like it or not, this has some potential. The plainlander military caste is fundamentally a red state institution. I would say that progressives in the military are as rare as conservatives at state, but it might be close. What makes this situation not at all volatile at present is that washcorps military, besides its excellent command discipline, has a strong tradition of conflating plainland and washcorps. I believe the composite is known as America. Apparently, there's some sort of colorful flag thing, like a logo, but you can print it on a cloth and run it up a pole, a sort of 18th century version of a Blue Force tracker. Well, now it's reversed. That logo is not the American flag anymore, and there's a lot of progressives in the military.
Yep.
But as of writing 2008, he was correct. That was the distribution.
Yeah.
As someone with no conservative heritage whatsoever, my impression is that most conservatives, while basically sensible, are quite confused about the nature of the modern state. It is hard for me to avoid the conclusion that this confusion primarily serves the interests of their enemies. Perhaps I am right, and perhaps the problem will be rectified. However, I don't see any sign of this happening. Okay,
man, we gotta pause there. Because yeah, I don't know who in the chats watched the Blazes Summit thing last night, but that was really prescient, right? What Moldbug just said. I want to do a review of this later with you, but like there was a moment in there where they had this moment of clarity, like, wow, corporations can be the bad guys. It was absolutely amazing to just watch the looks on their faces at certain moments where they're like, oh, this is why we're losing all the time. It was crazy.
Wow. Okay. But what I was going to say though is he's right about them being confused about the nature of the state. They're still kind of confused, but for the most part, it's simply pointless for anyone who is not part of the military to think at all about military coups. If the generals want to act, they will act. They won't tell anyone, and they won't ask anyone. And they will probably act only under quite dire circumstances, which is simply puerile to wish for. That said, there are some interesting options that could be facilitated by the internet. For example, suppose someone managed to set up an external site which could verify the identity and rank of military personnel but keep it anonymous. The result would be an uncensored forum in which soldiers and sailors could speak honestly about their feelings and concerns. If this platform was scalable enough to hold an actual democratic election in which the only military personnel could vote, it's quite possible that the outcome of the ballot would have a rather different effect on the course of washcorps. For producing truth, justice, and competition, government elections are not much. For organizing large numbers of otherwise independent actors, for constant concerted collective action, let's face it, they're the shizzle. However, this strategy is impractical at present and may never be practical. It is best reserved for the back burner. I mention it only because I can imagine very hypothetical situations under which it might work. This leaves us with the good old-fashioned way of seizing power, convincing people to vote for you. But how is this different from the Ron Paul revolution? Allow me to explain. As I've said before, washcorps is best understood not as an electoral democracy, but as a massarchy. A massarchy is a state in which power is held by those who manage public opinion. The difference between massarchy and electoral democracy is that in a massarchy, the permanent government, civil service, maintains a higher degree of legitimacy than elected politicians. The latter are thus essentially decorative and disposable. Massarchy works because with modern broadcasting and polling, the tools available to the civil service for both influencing and measuring public opinion are much more powerful and sensitive than anything in the political system. In the 19th century, at least, the early 19th century politicians actually purported to change the voters' minds on substantive issues with their speeches and debates. Needless to say, the beliefs of the normal modern voter are either installed via the schools and the press, or in some cases, transmitted through peer networks, which are incredibly jammed with bogus information, conspiracy theories, etc. when we were reading earlier about Moldbug's, how ideas are formed, he seems to completely leave out like pop culture. That's crazy. That's where like most people are just like living scenes of movies out in their head.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like nowhere here. And then when he went into more detail back in 2007, I don't remember him ever. I mean, all Moldbug does is make bad pop culture references, Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever. It's like he mentioned Patrick Swayze, so that's going to be Red Dawn. It's like most people are just living a collage of movies scenes in their head. Like that's really what's going on here.
I think, yeah, there's something to it. What he seemed to be talking about before was how trusted information is transmitted. So people hear information all the time. How do they take it and think they can trust it? The pop culture thing seems to be quasi aspirational. People want to be the Harry Potter fighting the Voldemort or whatever the heck's going on. And that's like more subtle cultural stuff. And back then, he seemed to be more modeling like how do trusted matters of fact seem to be understood and transmitted by people.
Mm-hmm. Under masarchy, civil servants have an additional advantage. They can anticipate future public opinion because the leftward drift of opinion has been so consistently predictable. Gay rights, for example, is an excellent metric. It is very easy for a civil servant in 2008 to simply organize his career around the plausible political center of 2018, or even 2028. That didn't age so well, did it at all? Not so easy for a politician. Even 2028. I don't know, Logos. It's not that easy anymore.
Even as far as 2018, where was the center? If you organized for where you thought the center would be in 2018, in 2008, you're probably gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, you're gonna have a bad
Even if
time.
you're a civil servant, you're probably in trouble.
It's very easy. Look, Logos. It's just very easy right here. Very easy.
Right.
Well, you know what it's going to be really hard, Logos? 2020, and there's certain mandates you have to enforce.
Oh man. Yeah, that is the center too, isn't it? That's the center. That's not even like the radical left. That's the center.
I think Moldbug is implicitly assuming history ended. I think he's implicitly assuming Fukuyama.
I don't know enough about Fukuyama to confirm, but I think you might be right.
Because he seems to think certain things are just not going to happen. He knows they can happen in the past. He's written about them, but he just seems to think that they can't happen now. And it's inexplicable. I mean, I remember when I was in college at this time, everybody was like, just certain things can't happen anymore. I'm like, why? They happened before, they'll happen again. No, but they can't happen anymore. Okay, well, you're wrong. So it's no wonder that the popularity of the permanent government is so high that no pollster even bothers tracking it. You know, the Bush administration was not popular in 2008. What's he talking about? Oh, wait. No, Obama wasn't in yet, was he? This is January of 2008. I don't think so.
January 2008 would be just before Obama takes office.
Okay, so maybe he's referring to Obama.
Mm-hmm.
In which case he was very popular. Civil servants proper are simply expert professionals who carry out the policies of their masters. The politicians who are elected by the all-knowing public whose opinions are right and cannot be inquired into. Nothing to see here. Move right along. The press comes in for a little more flack, especially since the AM airwaves and the internet open up, but it certainly has power to compensate. As for the universities and schools, who is against science, the arts, and letters or education? No one. There is no opposition. Politics is harmless and contained. Who's against science? No one. Well, what about the woke? That's just racism, bro. Logic is racism, Logos. Don't you know that?
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because there's two brands of woke. We were talking a little before the stream about how there can be like two branches of science. There's two branches of the woke. There's one branch of the woke that's like the Fauciite, technocrat. I am the science woke. And then there's the can your science explain how our shaman can call the lightning woke?
Yep. Elections are still informative for one reason. They measure not simple opinion, but motivation and organizational power. A poll will not do this. For example, the fact that the Republicans didn't really care for Rudy Giuliani is a fascinating product of the presidential election. If you had been sure of this a year ago, you could have made quite a bit of money on the prediction markets. What the early polls were indicating was just name recognition, which is often a good indication of popularity, but prone to remarkable errors. The sad fate of Big Rudy tells us nothing about public opinion or any substantive issue. In theory, however, I suppose it could. WashCore is also capable of bending when it has to, and 9/11 made the White House, which is, of course, inherently temporary, and DOD a hotbed of subversive grumbling. Unexpectedly popular, we saw a short bull market in hawkishness, not just in Congress, but also even in the press. Remember Judy Miller, State Department, etc. This is easily explained by the theory that the primary goal of everyone in Washington is to attain as much power as possible and retain it for as long as possible. When public opinion shifts, WashCore shifts with it. But Logos, the people who own WashCorp create the public opinion.
Yes.
Corporations run the government and corporations create public opinion. This whole mechanism he's describing is just wrong. It's not, I mean, in some sense, there is still this galloping Gertie effect of the electorate. But who shapes the electorate's opinions?
The media. And then who shapes the media opinion?
Yeah, the corporations,
Street.
manufacturing consent. Yeah, and who also shapes government opinion? Wall Street. Well, it's think tanks. It's think tanks like the Brookings Institute or others, but they get the big corporate money.
Yep. So
Moldbug really, really, really doesn't want to see the obvious here. In 19th century Britain, figures who adopted this strategy were called trimmers. Unfortunately, now that everyone except for Ron Paul is a trimmer, there's no real use for the word. This sort of unromantic view of the democratic system is absolutely critical if you want to employ what I think is the only practical strategy for defeating WashCorp. Capture public opinion and turning it against WashCorp itself. Trimming is no defense against its attack. If WashCorp trims, it agrees to commit suicide. If it doesn't, it loses its vulnerability to attack through the electoral system, and electing politicians who will kill it becomes a viable strategy. Yeah, well, good luck convincing the Rockefellers and the Carnegies to change public opinion for you, Logos.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the only way to actually defeat the U.S. government is for the attacker to actually beat it at its own game, manufacturing consent. Everything else is a waste of time. You see, if he's using the word, he got it from Chomsky. He knows who's manufacturing the consent, so he's being intentionally dishonest.
Yep.
He's being intentionally dishonest. Because, again, like you said, he probably knows where this word comes from.
Yep.
Comes from Chomsky. Okay, well, in my opinion, this is nothing but the truth. This helps. It certainly makes the job easier. But the fundamental nature of the task is military. In the Clausewitzian sense, truth has certain natural advantages over fiction. It has other natural disadvantages. When your product is the truth, you probably don't want to contaminate the message with fiction. When your product is fiction, you're free to add any useful embroidery. My point is that the goal is to get from point A to point B, and anyone who believes that truth just does this on its own is reading the wrong blog. If the truth is always victorious on its own, it would already have been victorious. And since it has not been, my view of WashCorp cannot be the truth. Either way, you are barking up someone else's tree. Well, I mean, I just don't buy this. In a sense, the truth, let's use a situation example where you know that society is collapsing and you have a pretty good idea of how it's collapsing. And, so let me back it up. One of the things that I'm often harping on is you can't have, all this limitless energy consumption based on the planetary system. That truth, while people argue about it, will eventually resolve itself. And all the arguments will be rendered moot at that point. So yeah, the truth will eventually assert itself on its own. Just which side of it are you on?
Right.
Moldbug just has a really weird way of looking at the world, and I don't know where it's coming from. So let's say that you have the resources of Ron Paul's war chest. What is it, 20 million? I hope this hasn't been spent. I'd like to think it could end up at LVMI, and your goal is to manufacture enough consent to liquidate WatchCore. What do you do? Buy TV ads for Ron Paul, perhaps? Complete liquidation may not be exactly the Ron Paul platform, but surely it's close enough for government work. Perhaps if you start by selling Dr. Paul, you can move on to a more aggressive message. The idea that any of the money bomb take is being spent on TV ads disturbs me. Sort of hard hand letter signs on telephone poles. It's the worst strategy I can think of. Advertising may get you a small amount of name recognition among particularly uninformed voters. These are not the people who are going to vote for Ron Paul, or even if they are, not the people you want. Inch-deep support is worthless. For an intelligent and thoughtful person, going from the official press or TV to Ron Paul, let alone to liquidate WatchCore, is not a decision that could possibly be influenced by a 30-second spot or even a 5-minute spot. It is not quite at the magnitude of a religious conversion, but it comes close. Most people are not intelligent and thoughtful, anything but. But they know that the government is a serious business, and they know enough to get their views on government from the people they see as intelligent and thoughtful. For most plainlanders today, this chain terminates in the official press, which, as we've seen, is an essential organ of WatchCore. Though, both of whom are run by Wall Street, but we'll leave that aside. Well, Wikipedia's reliable source policy is typical. In general, the most reliable sources are peer-reviewed journals and books published in university presses. University-level textbooks, magazines, journals, and books published by respectable publishing houses and mainstream newspapers. What security does this policy provide against political corruption? Absolutely none. And it says, trust the authorities. The computer is your friend. Those are not the droids you're looking for. The tap water is perfectly safe. The procedure is for your own good, etc. It is not Lowiki's goal to replace or challenge the mainstream. In fact, I'd say that it is a sensible and conservative to not even try. Short of uber fact, I don't see how it could even be attempted. And the fact that we could not imagine a Wikipedia without the mainstream information distributors, which of course are informal arms of the state, should alert you to the scale of the problem. Imagine what this paragraph would look like in a modern Third Reich or Soviet Union. Besides being written in German or Russian, how else would it differ? If you remain confused, perhaps this fine article about Putin's new textbooks will enlighten you. From the adversarial perspective, the best way to think of WatchCore is as a cult. It so happens that the cult is hundreds of years old, and almost all plainlanders believe in it. In fact, they accept it so uncritically that they believe there's nothing to believe in. Their natural response to anyone who shows up at their door or on their TV and tries to deprogram them will be to think that it is in fact this person who is trying to suck them into a cult. All cult members believe everyone in the outside world is crazy and vice versa. This is quite normal. Who is the cult? The only test is the truth. One of the things I've been trying to do here at UR is construct a set of case studies in how WatchCore systematically and quite unconsciously propagates and maintains a fictional perspectives of a reality among plainlanders. Unconsciously? I mean, this is just, it's like saying you unconsciously got pregnant. Like, what this is stupid. Like, I think this is proof of your point, Logos. He's trying to seduce the right. Mm-hmm. That's right. The right always has these conspiracy. He just was taking whacks at the militia movement, right? There's no conspiracy, guys. There's no cabal of, Beltway, DC types trying to screw you over. That he's shielding them because he always says it's organic, it's adaptive, it's unconscious. There's no actual plan to screw you over, people. Just go back to sleep.
Well, I mean, there is, but it's kind of like a fad. It's unintentional. It's just a cult, just doing things.
Right. To a point at which the very existence of the massarchy depends on these factions. If you are a new reader, perhaps the Just Unearthed crick letters are a simple way to shake your faith. WatchCorp is relatively flexible. It can adjust to many changes in public opinion, but imagine what it would take to adjust to a world in which Crick and Watson were right. Frankly, I can't even begin to fathom it. The gold standard is a trifle by comparison. I think it's pretty obvious that if all or even any of my conclusions in these matters are true, liquidating WatchCore in a timely and orderly way is not optional. After water and food, stable government is the next human essential. If you disagree, perhaps Jello Biafra has a lesson for you. If WatchCore security really is based on lies, so is yours. If this doesn't make you uncomfortable, perhaps you are some kind of weapons expert. I'm afraid I'm not. The problem is that I am not an authority on anything. I'm just some dude with a weird fake name. See, this is something that a lot of people do that I really hate. It's like, I have all this stuff to say, listen to me, but also don't take anything I say seriously because I'm not really an intellectual. There's something intrinsically just in bad taste about that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're smart enough to reason through my arguments and decide whether you agree with them or not, plus everyone like you could elect a dog catcher and gnome, my original blog template looks like ass. My posts are unedited and highly rambling, and I'm sure I have made many factual errors which don't involve the Cato Institute. Really, Logos? Yeah, many factual errors. If you really want to defeat WatchCorp, you need to do much, much better than this. You need a real institution with real money and real staff. Your goal is to be more credible than the official story. You cannot do this with one person. You need to build a website that anyone with a screen and a mouse can click on and get an accurate understanding of reality, including all the bits of history, government, economic science, and current events that WatchCorp doesn't want you to know. With a 5-minute overview for casual readers and an up-depth that a PhD with a standard WatchCorp education will come away at least gritting his teeth. You need to hire Steve Saylor and Michael Totten and Greg Cochran and Hans Hermann Hoppe and Stephen McIntyre and Jeffrey Rogers, Hummel and Razin Khan and Michael Jan and Jörg Guido Holmsmann, or at least people who are at least as smart, at least as knowledgeable, and at least as expressive as the above. You need to produce a coherent corpus of authoritative information a la Diderot, not just a random jam of essays. You need to crowdsource, but not without editorial control, so that Conquest Second Law doesn't do its thing. You need a place that anyone who speaks English can go to find out what is actually going on in the world and update that knowledge every day. And above all, you need to be right. Well, that's going to hurt, Logos. The libertarians being right. The task of replacing WatchCorp's pile of nonsense with some other pile of nonsense is simply not solvable. Then you need to wait 10 or 20 years because this stuff doesn't happen overnight. Hey, wait, Logos. So waiting 10 to 20 years is bad when the libertarians want you to do it. But when Moldbug wants you to trust the plan of the Dark Elves, wait 10 to 20 years, hobbits. Trust me.
Well, right? He didn't give us 10 to 20 years. He just said keep waiting.
It's even worse. Because this stuff doesn't happen overnight. Yeah, right. We can't seduce those high elves overnight, guys. It's going to take some time. Your accurate description of reality has to be more fashionable than the official mainstream truth. Fortunately, the latter is extremely boring, chock full of pretentious cant and intentional obfuscation. Wait, is he talking about the official truth or himself?
Yeah.
And often transparently self-contradictory. But you also have to be more fashionable than all your alternative competitors see under Alex Jones, which is definitely non-trivial. Too bad it has to be done. Hey, stay away from AJ, Logos. This is my boy. Stay away from AJ. The way to defeat a massarchy is to create and propagate a credible alternative reality that outcompetes the official information network. 15 years ago, the propaganda part was almost impossible. Today, it's trivial. All that's left is the creation, and I bet it could be done in half Cato's budget. Bored billionaires of Plainland, you have nothing to lose but your WatchCorp. Why not give it a shot? I mean, especially now, right, since Moldbug has come back. His entire characterization of things is just so badly wrong. Like, okay, his idea about the massarchy, where it's just pollsters running everything. No, the pollsters got 2016 badly wrong. Second of all, the way the government acts, it acts as if it's an oligarchy. It doesn't act as if it's a bunch of pollsters running the show.
Yeah, I really want him to talk about that study, the Princeton study, I think it was, that said, like, if you look at how people poll on issues and you look at what Congress passes, it passes stuff relative to what lobbyists want, but it just diverges heavily from what people poll.
Yep. But Logos, remember, money doesn't have any power. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, silly me. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm sorry.
Revpedia, how to defeat the U.S. government reprise. Okay, so I guess he didn't really tell us how to overthrow the U.S. government. Like I said he wouldn't. Start like Cato 2.0. That's how we're going to beat the U.S. government.
Yeah, right.
January the 19th, 2008. As usual, there are many excellent comments, some quite critical on the last post. I'm particularly impressed with Lugo's criticisms, although it's a little unfair because Lugo was whacking me on a subject I punted on, but the observations on the U.S. military are dead right, and TGGP, we love you, but I'm afraid that we may have been a typo for post-sucking moron. I'm still not quite sure what this means, but draw your own conclusions. Reading the comments, however, I don't think I was clear enough in describing the information warfare project I proposed. People describe it as a think tank. This is nowhere near what I meant. So let me break the every Thursday schedule and put up next week's post today. Think tanks such as Cato or LVMI are all very well. Perhaps we can see them as replacements for the sclerotic university system, and is an unfortunate consequence of the post-1945 Bushian Gleichschaltung of the American university that think tanks cannot actually train students, and this is by no means their only defect. However, the Thinkiverse does supply a small but quite useful dose of intellectual variety to a Walmart of ideas. However, a think tank is not actually a project. A think tank sponsors thinkers. It hires them because it thinks they are smart and knowledgeable, and their interests and perspectives coincide with their goals. What it does not do in general is tell them what to do. Its work is not designed to produce anything like a product, or if it is, the product is simply the set of all the papers produced by all the thinkers. This may be useful, but it cannot be coherent. The administrators of a think tank are not, in any sense, project managers. They are support staff. All they do is give the thinkers a place to think and presumably write said thoughts down, and a think tank does not have an objective. It has a mission, quite a different thing. Take LVMI for instance. I'm sure most of the folks at LVMI would be quite delighted to see the last of old WashCore. However, is defeating the U.S. government the objective of LVMI? Not at all. It has no objective. Rather, its mission is to sponsor Austrian economists and libertarian philosophers who get a chilly reception in the normal groves, either because they are cranks and whiners or because they are in possession of inconvenient truths. Mises and Rothbard spent most of their careers in the academic equivalent of broom closets. Perhaps like me, you are a software engineer. I have never worked at Microsoft, but I have a pretty good idea of how Microsoft works. If I were to be hired at Microsoft, I would be hired in one or two very different departments. One is a product development, which gives us a glorious gazillion-line cathedrals of code, such as Windows and Word. The other is MS Research, which is basically the CS equivalent of a think tank, i.e. it hires PhDs who don't want to teach or can't get a good teaching job and sponsors their research. I need something like that, Logos. MS Research employs a lot of smart people, but I'm sure it's produced something useful, although I can't think of any examples offhand. Okay, I know one clear type. Though sub-pixel rendering is hardly Edison's light bulb. If the lack of a PhD did not clench it, I'm sure that after reading this, MS Research would not touch me with a 10-foot pole, since I would not touch MS Product Development with a 10-foot pole. I don't think there's a fit, but I digress. In any case, what I'm imagining is squarely on the product side. It demands not just sagely thought, but actual management. We are not used to thinking of sages as people who can work as part of a team. I'm afraid most sages are not used to thinking this way either, but I have seen it done, and I know it can be done. And if you don't trust me, trust the Manhattan Project. Let's call the project Revpedia. The purpose of Revpedia is to be like Wikipedia, except that it serves as a reliable source of all topics, no matter how technical or controversial, and no matter how detached from reality the centrist mainstream may be. If Revpedia can be built, there are two possibilities. Either A, it will confirm that the centrist mainstream is significantly detached from reality, or B, it will confirm that is not. WatchCourt, by actively supporting that mainstream, not to mention deprecating and ridiculing its competition, has staked its legitimacy on B. So A, if accepted by sufficient subset of WatchCourt subjects, is sufficient to defeat it. In other words, A, by definition, convicts USG of the crime of Lysenkoism, propagating a fallacious interpretation of reality as a mechanism for political control. This is the capital of offense. There's no way for a government or any institution, for that matter, to excuse or apologize for Lysenkoism. Like cancer, it must be excised completely. When in doubt, throw it out. There's no good reason for an official monopoly whose modus operandi includes the propagation of misconceptions to continue to exist. If the institution performs other functions which are indeed useful or even essential, it is still probably easiest to liquidate it and build a replacement from scratch. You know, Moldbug just said in the last article that libertarians are just going to take your jobs away, and you're not going to get people to support you by getting rid of their jobs. Literally, I don't know, since like June of 2007, all he talks about is liquidating people's jobs in the government.
Yeah, but he always gives them a nice transfer package, right? He pays them very, very nice to leave.
Oh, I'm sure libertarians would too.
Yeah, probably.
But that's not the point, right? His own policy demands a lot of fat cutting, which isn't sellable. If it's not sellable for the libertarians, it's not sellable for him because he's not doing anything different.
Right.
Right, that's the point. But replacing organization is simple. Purging individuals or subunits from existing ones is impossibly time-consuming, tendentious, and pointless. If you want to convert Tony Soprano's mob into an actual legitimate waste management company, what would you start? What would you do? Start by replacing Pauline Walnuts with some guy from McKinsey who, when in doubt, throw it out. Note that the difference between institutional mendacity and its far more benign political cousin. Ebola and the common cold are both viruses. There the analogy ends. Politics is modular by definition. If LBJ or Nixon or Bush or any other Democratic politician lies to the American people and gets caught, the latter have a straightforward mechanism by which to replace him with some other lying jackass. This is not a perfect cure for political mendacity, but at least keeps the problem under control. When we combine this with the fact that the entire system greatly exaggerates the power of politicians to affect actual policy, we can see that the political lies are a little more than a cosmetic defect. But if the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and every other serious newspaper, every TV station, every public school, every major university, and of course every Department of Watch Corps proper choose to present their subjects with bogus information, we have a much more serious problem because there is no way you can go to your little voting booth and register your disapproval of these fine institutions. So to my point about money and control, in my last, I don't know if you watched the logo from my last Sutton video, we were reading about the Butler plot, where Smelly Butler claims to have outed a plot that was going to overthrow FDR in 1934 or something. But Sutton was talking about this in the broader context of his book Wall Street and FDR, and he said that Wall Street bought up the leading newspapers, and he specifically quotes from the New York Times as having been bought out by Wall Street interests.
Wow.
Yeah,
we talked about congressional hearings about that. I didn't watch your video, but we were talking on stream a while ago about the hearings around that plot. And you said something like people were testifying and implicating witnesses. The meeting just got like shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the Wall Street interests owned the Times, and they're like, you're not saying this. So yeah, this idea that these outlets haven't been bought by corporations is just patently absurd. Moreover, if this is the case, we should not expect these institutions to correct themselves, since any detection of Lysenkoism is delegitimizing, since it is grounds for not merely reforming, but in fact liquidating the institutions responsible. No one has any conceivable incentive to own up. The optimal strategy is stonewalling, simply because no one can gain anything by defecting and joining the cranks, whiners, and malcontents. If you believe that this can't happen, or that it does happen, any appearance of truth will quickly outcompete any conceivable fiction you believe in B. Wait, if you believe that this can't happen, or that if it doesn't. That is, you believe that the centrist mainstream is basically providing you with an accurate perspective of realities. Is the case? Famas aver. Wait, why would it? That doesn't follow at all. If he's saying that, let's just quickly here. If the truth doesn't quickly outcompete any conceivable fiction, you believe that the centrist mainstream is basically true. No, why would that follow? Oh, you're muted, Logos.
Sorry, I'm trying to catch up a little bit. Say what you said again.
Moldbug seems to be saying here that if you believe that the truth will outcompete the lie, then you believe B, which is that the centrist mainstream media is basically correct. That's not true.
Yeah, I don't know where he's getting that from.
That's bizarro. Like, okay, I'll give you an example, right? The one we're dealing with right now. The idea that when conservatives were opposed to the LGBTQ agenda, they were saying that this was the pedo pipeline. Everybody's like, oh, you're crazy, you're crazy. Now it's everywhere. And now, it did take like 15 years, but, the truth is getting out. See, here's the thing. It's easier for the truth to get out now because we have smartphones and all sorts of like pocket-sized devices to transmit information.
Right. A good example of that was like when CNN did that article, that snippet showing the funeral, and the person giving the eulogy at the funeral is calling for peace or whatever. They took a little snippet out of it, and somebody recorded the funeral with like their smartphone and showed the whole clip. And she was saying, she wasn't calling for peace. She's like, don't burn our stuff down, burn the white people's stuff down. Just going on a rant about how you should burn the white people's stuff down. You never would have got that from what CNN was saying. Like you can't call them without smartphones.
Yeah. Moreover, if this is the case, we should accept these institutions to correct themselves, since any detection of Lysenkoism is delegitimizing, since it's grounds for not merely reforming, but in fact liquidating the institution responsible. No one has any conceivable incentive to own up. The optimal strategy is... Oh, I was stumbling. Let me share my own small piece of experience in the matter. I know exactly when I lost my faith in the mainstream. It was in August 2004 during the Swift boat affair. I was perhaps something of a neocon at the time, and so I was plugged into the vast right-wing conspiracy. At least I was a regular reader of Powerline, as I still to some extent am. Reader, there are 2 links in the above paragraph. I guarantee that if you follow both of them, you'll end up in different realities. One of them is real, the other is the Truman Show. Do you have an opinion as to which it is? I do. If your faith in Lewicki remains strong, scroll to the end of the section and read this. And remember who still refuses to release his military records. And after all that fact, because I was plugged into the vast right-wing conspiracy, I was reading about the whole affair in exceedingly gory detail well before the counterspin started. I have been reading unauthorized information on the internet for well over half my life, and I think I'm pretty good at distinguishing between reality and crap. Oh, wow, Logos. Let's just say I wouldn't say that. Would you?
No.
And the simple explanation that Kerry is a blowhard who told tall tales about his sailor day struck me as compelling. So I wondered, how will they handle this? What happens when 3 months before a presidential election it comes out that one of the 2 candidates has publicly prevaricated about his military record? Obviously, he'll have to drop out of the race. But who will the Democrats select, and how will they select him? Will they hold an emergency convention, or will it just be Edwards? I suppose it would probably just be Edwards. Allhouse, whom I don't think I was reading at the time and still don't. She's a fine writer and has much to say, but she Twitters knew better. Man, so Twitter goes back to 2008. I kind of forgot how old Twitter is. So it seems that Kerry's idea for how to deal with this huge Swiftboat veterans problem is to churn up a swirling mass of impressions and imputations and then hope that he is the one who looks clean in the end. The Kerry people seem to be hoping that people are too dim to understand that a group of Bush supporters could operate independently or conspiracy-minded enough to think that they all coordinated behind the scenes in a planned violation of the law. There is a separate point Kerry has made that Bush should openly denounce the ads and that his failure to do so signifies a willingness to reap the advantage they bring him. That's the clean point, but it has been made. And it apparently hasn't done well enough because we now see the campaign boat steering over the border into right-wing conspiracy land. And there it has remained. I never dreamed that Kerry's campaign would be crazy enough to just plain stonewall. I certainly could not have imagined that it would work, at least for some value of the word work. Kerry lost, of course, in a close race. Perhaps the SBVT affair made the difference, but perhaps it actually helped Kerry. Who knows? But what I mean by work is that the Kerry strategy, just as Outhouse describes, has entered public memory as the truth. At least among the most thoughtful, reasonable Americans. Thoughtful, reasonable Americans voted for Kerry. And certainly among most professional historians. Almost all professional historians voted for Kerry. It has not just entered Lewicki and the history books via swift boating, it has actually entered the English language. Mind-boggling. And this is a tiny, tiny detail in history. Almost nothing turns on it, except, of course, the small question of whether you can trust the computer. But how confident does this make you say that what you know about Joseph McCarthy is accurate? Click at that link, too. It's interesting. I read the Evans book, and I can't actually recommend it, mainly because it is a work of a polemic, not of history. Evans did a lot of archival work. Oh, I think he's referring to M. Stanton Evans. Oh, let's see here. Yeah, okay. Right. But the subtitle rather gives the game away. I trust his results as far as I go, but I don't trust Evans to include any bit of evidence he might find that would suggest to the reader that McCarthy was in fact a major league asswipe. Since I strongly suspect that whatever the truth of his fight against America's enemies, McCarthy was a major league asswipe, I remain unsatisfied. Evans' book does convince me quite effectively that McCarthy's enemies were at least as unscrupulous as anything you've ever heard about McCarthy himself from Lewicki. From what I know of Watch Corp, this is hardly a surprise, and if the subject interests you, you may enjoy this review or exchange. The McCarthy drama is far bigger, far more complex story than anything involving John Kerry. And as we see, it remains quite debatable. How about, say, the Civil War? Lately, I've enjoyed some writings of Charles Francis Adams, James Randall, Cloud Bowers, William Dunning, and Benjamin Hill on the period. I believe I'd previously recommended Edgar Lee Masters, Albert Beveridge, and of course, John Burgess. Suffice it to say that mid to late 19th century, as described by these gentlemen, has little or nothing in common with the reality purveyed by Lewicki or other reputable contemporary sources, and yet they were there, or at least knew people who were. Talk about the old reckoning. And this is just history. We have not even started on economics or the art of government or human biology or climatology. Heresies abound. Are they right? Are they wrong? Who the hell can tell? Quit trusting authority, and you are alone on a black sea in a black night. The truth is out there, but you have not a thousandth of the time, money, or mind you would need to find it on your own.
That's a good point.
Yeah. You and I guess, have something of that. We have the time and the mind, maybe not the money. Right? So, and every one of these fields and many more affect the profit and power of WatchCore because you vote your judgment of the matters. And as we have seen over and over and over again, WatchCore has motive, propensity, and opportunity to manage that judgment in directions favorable to itself. Nor does such management require any central planning or conspiracy. All it would take is a thumb on the scale in the marketplace of ideas, which does not, of course, prove that any such thumb exists. Well, maybe it's the invisible hands thumb, Logos.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. The other day, I was bowled over by a simply stupendous book, Chronicles of Wasted Time. The autobiography of Malcolm Muggeridge. Only the first volume, The Green Stick, is essential. Please allow me to quote at length from this book. It is not famous, it should be. Page 19. Okay, one of Moldbug's long quotations. I desire to set before my fellows the likeness of a man in all truth of nature, and that man myself. Rousseau begins his Confessions, and then proceeds to construct a vast serpentine edifice of lies and fantasies. The hazards in the way of telling the truth are indeed very great. Seeking it, one can so easily become enmeshed in lies. A truth that's told with bad intent beats all lies you can invent, Blake wrote. Every man the center of his own universe. Insensibly we sub-edit as we go along to produce headlines, crossheads, a storyline most favorable to our egos. How indestructible, alas, is that ego? Thinking to have struck it down once and for all, I find it hissing cobra head lifted again, deathless. Yet even so, truth is very beautiful, more so as I consider than justice to 2 days' pursuit, which easily puts on a false face. In nearly 7 decades I have lived through, the world is overflowed with bloodshed and explosions, whose dust has never had time to settle before others have erupted, all in purportedly just causes. The quest for justice continues and the weapons and the hatred pile up, but truth was an early casualty. The lies on behalf of which our wars have been fought and our peace treaties concluded, the lies of revolution and counter-revolution, the lies of advertising, of news, of salesmanship, of politics, the lies of the priest in his pulpit, the professor at his podium, the journalist at his typewriter. The lie is stuck like a fishbone in the throat of the microphone, the handheld lies of the prowling cameraman. Ignazio Salone told me once how, when he was a member of the old Comintern, some stratagem was under discussion, and a delicate newcomer, who had never attended before, made the extraordinary observation that if such and such a statement were to be put out, it wouldn't be true. There was a moment of dazed silence, and then everyone began to laugh. They laughed and laughed until tears ran down their cheeks and the Kremlin walls seemed to shake. The same laughter echoes in every council chamber and cabinet room, wherever two or more are gathered together to exercise authority. It is the truth that has died, not God. I often wonder how in such circumstances it will ever be possible to know anything at all about the people and the happenings of our times. Such masses and masses of documentation, statistics without end, data of every kind, eyewitness accounts, miles and miles of film, video abounding. Surely out of all this, posterity, if so desiring, will be able to reconstruct us in our lives, but will they? I think of Sidney and Beatrice Webb, Mugger married Beatrice's niece down at Passfield, patiently collecting and collating every scrap of information they could lay hands on about the Soviet regime, traveling about the USSR to the same end, as experienced investors, so rigorous and careful, and the result, a monumental folly, a volume of fantasy compared with which Casanova's memoirs, Frank Harris's even, are sober and realistic. Or I think of the messages of our own correspondents here, there, and everywhere, and all the different factors which shape them and slant them and confection them. I remember the yellow ticker tape piling up in my office at the Washington National Press Building, and delving into it to pull out a nugget to wish off on my own account in New York and London. Will this be much help to posterity? I doubt it. Comment is free, but news is sacred. With C.P. Scott's great dictum for The Guardian, yes, but whose news? This life's dim windows of the soul distort the heaven from pole to pole and leads you to believe a lie when you see with not through the eye. There never have been such adepts at seeing rather than through the eye as the purveyors of Scott's sacred news, including their readers all too willingly to believe a multitude of lies. Or again, I think of a cameraman. I think of a camera crew on the job, sound recordist and cameraman umbilically linked as they back away from their commentator, sedately walking and communing. Their producer anxiously hovering behind to prevent them from stumbling and falling, moving with a kind of pas deux step, rather like a matador approaching his bull. Are they holding a mirror up to nature, cinema, verite, falsite? Where's the plastic grass? Or as I once saw written on a can of film, surely the perfect cellular epitaph, dawn for dusk. The eye is the window of the soul, film an iron shutter, says Kafka. On the day that Harold Wilson became prime minister for the first time, I happened to be in Chicago and stood in Michigan Avenue with a camera crew and a microphone, asking passengers by what they thought about him and our change of government. To my great satisfaction, I was unable to find anyone, young or old, black or white, smart or stupid, who had ever heard of the event or cared anything about it. Behind where I was questioning them, up above the Tribune building, there was one of those devices whereby news flashes by in fiery letters. Every minute or so it repeated, Douglas Home resigns, Harold Wilson, new British premier. A fine background to cut to. In Moscow, when the great purges were on, some moon-faced intourist, trying in good liberal style to be fair to both sides, asked one of the British newspaper correspondents there, A.T. Carleton of the Daily Telegraph, whether the accusations against the old Bolsheviks were true. Yes, Carleton told him, everything was true except the facts. It fits not just the purges in Moscow, but the whole 20th century scene. Perhaps some astronaut watching from afar the financial incineration of our Earth may care to witness right it across the stratosphere, everything true except the facts. Just as an interject real quick here. In light of what we know about Sutton's research in Wall Street and the Soviet Union, maybe Stalin's show trials weren't such a shame after all. That's actually one of the really interesting consequences of that research. Yet again, supposing a wish on the part of prosperity to know what some of our great ones were really like, John F. Kennedy say, in the archive, trainloads of material, photographs, and profiles without end, abundance of tape, both video and sound. We can show you him smiling, walking, talking on stage and off, as it were, relaxing with his family, addressing the nation, eating, dozing, praying. We have his jokes. We know the books he read. You can see and hear him delivering his great speeches or fooling with his kids. You can pretty well see him being assassinated. You can't see his assassin being assassinated. What more do you want? Isn't that the man, the whole man, and nothing but the man? Well, not quite. It's like a nightmare I once had. I was calling on someone I loved dearly. The door opened, the kettle boiling, a chair drawn up to the fire, spectacles laid beside it, but no one there. Maybe upstairs. With growing anxiety, I climbed the stairs. None in the bedroom. The clothes are scattered about. None in the bathroom, though it's still moist and misty from a bath recently taken. Downstairs again, really terrified now, maybe gone to post a letter to exercise the dog. Listen for every footstep, staring at every sound. The tensions become unbearable, and I wake up. In the same sort of way, the methods of representation include every detail. leaving out only the person to be presented. In a sense, they're too perfect. Simulation becomes what it simulates. The image becomes the man. That's Baudrillardi in there, Logos. I'm liking this. In Kennedy's case, even his signature was done for him by a machine which so exactly reproduced the hand signing his name that experts cannot distinguish between the real signature and the mechanical ones. In the excitement and distress of the Dallas tragedy, no one remembered to turn the machine off. So the president went on signal signing genial personal letters after he was dead. In this Sargasso Sea of fantasy and fraud, how can I or anyone else hope to swim unencumbered? How see with not through the eye? How take off my own motley, wash away the makeup, raise the iron shutter, put out the studio lights, silence, and sound effects, and put the cameras to sleep. Watch the sun rise on Sunset Boulevard and set over Forest Lawn. Find furniture among the studio props, silence and disoth love and striptease. Read truth of an auto cue, catch it on a screen, chase it on the wings of Muzak. View it in living color with the news, hear it in living sound along the motorways. Not in the wind that rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks, not in the earthquake that followed, nor in the fire that followed the earthquake. In a still small voice, not in the screeching of tires, either of the grinding of breakers, not in the roar of jets or the whistle of sirens, not in the howl of trombones, the rattle of drums, or the chanting of demo voices again. That still small voice, if only one could catch it. Typically, when I start to write this way, it means I've had a glass of wine or 3, but I still think it's pretty good. Trust me, the book has actual content as well. Revpedia is not, of course, a magic oracle. It is a tool to help you. The curious and intelligent person finds that still small voice. Here's how it works. It's really quite simple. Revpedia, or at least my idea of Revpedia should be, is best seen as a cross between Wikipedia, Climate Audit, and UberFact. According to most scientists, 98% of the facts on Wikipedia are true. Studies have shown that 90% of the rest are accidental errors, vandalism, or mistakes of the sort the wiki is designed to correct. This is precisely 0.2% of the Wikipedia pages are contaminated with Cincoism, politically constructed distortions derived from sacred news. Sadly, this is more than enough. Of course, since Wikipedia is not at all immune to conquest second law, every organization not explicitly reactionary tends to become progressive. And since all serious and effective Lysenkoism in the modern era is progressive, this percentage will tend to increase. Now that Lowicki is much more than a toy, she wields real power, and the power attracts reptiles. Wikipedia is not a toy, but it succeeds because it started as a toy. It established a pool of amateur dilettante administrators who, by and large, were foolish enough to care only for the truth. This is very nice, and I personally have found it quite useful, but it's not sustainable. Banal as the old Chiralisms are, the fundamental difference between the modern left and the modern right is that the left is the party of victory and the right is the party of defeat. In the history of the last 2 centuries, it is almost impossible to find any issue on which the right has stood and won. Even the exceptions, such as the revival of capitalism in the last few decades, have served the greater interests of the left. Without Thatcher, there could be no Blair. There was no future in the winter of discontent. You know, Logos, almost like technology has a left-wing bent built into it.
Almost.
Right? Because, I mean, the first conservatives who had to deal with this 200 years ago, they asked a really good question. This has always been this way. Why are we losing now?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a good question because it's always been this way. Well, it's because it's the machine. It's the only thing that changed, the only thing that's different. And the left knows that. That's why Marxism and actual communist countries have this huge fetish for technological development, even if they're not very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Conservatism, so-called, is a bargain that trades personal success for substantial destruction. It produces jobs for quacks, each with some patent remedy against the wind of change. No such remedy has ever worked, but the light trial market is eternal, and perhaps conservatives have helped here and there in holding us back from Niagara, or at least some short up the barrel staves. In exchange, however, they have deceived us about the true nature of power in our society. Your mileage may vary, but I find this bargain dubious at best. The unfortunate truth, in my extremely dodgy opinion, is that the only way our civilization can survive leftism is to abolish it completely. along with the political structures that inevitably spawn it. This is not a conservative attitude, but a reactionary one, and I see no choice but to accept the label. Well, here's the thing, right? It's not political structures that make the left possible. It's technology that makes the left possible. Women couldn't be half the workforce without technology. Simple as. You wouldn't have these diversity quotas without technology. And I think that's, we've already had this discussion before, Logos. When technology confers military advantages and you're running states, you kind of have to get on board. Otherwise, you get conquered.
Right.
But as with everything, there's a law of diminishing returns, and I think we're rapidly reaching those diminishing returns. But of course, Moldbug loves technology. That's why Moldbug is progressive, because he loves technology. He wants technology to keep progressing. He just wants, a libertarian-esque cultural flavor to it. I mean, he's okay with Roe v. Wade. He got really pissy when it got overturned. So,
as far as diminishing returns, we won't really know until the gloves fully come off in World War III. I predict we're going to be seeing some technology there that we just didn't even conceive of. There's probably a lot of stuff locked up in R&D, classified, whatever, that's going to blow our minds.
Yeah. Where was I? So to a reactionary, Wikipedia is a dangerous ally indeed. However, given that 98% of it, that is true, and the vast quantity of human labor that went into constructing that 98%, Revpedia needs to bootstrap as a Wikipedia mirror. When you use Revpedia, every page that has no Revpedia revisions just redirects to the wiki. Of course, it appears marked as such to indicate a generally low trust level. Note the difference between a mirror and a fork. A mirror remains live and propagates updates, ideally instantaneously. Sadly, not only does LoWiki lack any proper data, API provides no diffs, but only dumps. And only a ridiculous every 2 months schedule, she actually goes out of her way to block live mirrors. Perhaps there are some good reasons for this. I can only think of plenty of bad ones. Her image dump is also broken, which is simply unacceptable. Probably the easiest way to fix this would be to fix LoWiki herself, if she cares to be fixed. Here I say this would take real money. Furthermore, when it creates its revised pages, Revpedia tries, whenever possible, to use the Wikipedia namespace. For example, imagine what the GNXP crowd would do to the scientific racism page, or climate audit to the temperature record of the last 1,000 years, or LVMI to fractional reserve lending. Of course, if needed, Revpedia could create de novo, but LoWiki would have to be very tricky to sustain Lysenkoism based only on a devious categorization. Sharing the namespace also helps limit fork conflicts, which are always a problem. But anyone can edit Wikipedia, right? So why don't they do what they want to do now? Who needs the Revpedia thing? Yes, anyone can edit Wikipedia, anyone, but a particularly horrendous Gouldian fiction. I myself slipped a reference to Gray and Thompson in 2004 into the scientific racism page, where it looks rather odd, but seems to have lasted, knock on wood. In practice, however, most serious editing in Wikipedia is done by the Wikipedians, who by definition are people with the patience to withstand and win edit wars. Most of us are not Wikipedians and will never be Wikipedians. It appears to be quite the time sink. Sounds like Logos Wikipedians have the dedication you do to arguing with people.
Yeah, basically. Well, I don't know. I don't have it anymore. I block people a lot on Twitter these days.
But you used to have it.
Oh, I used to have it. Yeah, they're me in my 20s.
Well, there was the whole Blizzard thing. That was you. You just went all the way in. Well, remember you were looking for like some statistics or something?
Oh yeah, I was arguing with people about when World of Warcraft subscriptions started tanking, and I went all the way back and found the subscriptions of subscribers from like Wrath to Cataclysm to Mist, all this stuff, and just like made this ridiculous argument. And of course, nobody could do anything. They just like ghosted me. I'm like, okay, yeah, leave.
Yeah, Logo. See, yeah, you in your 20s was a Wikipedian.
That one was actually pretty recent. I just didn't think that was much of an argument. When I'm thinking of like going into people, I'm thinking of like the week-long arguments I'd have with Thomists and YouTube comment sections and stuff. Like that was something I used to do in my 20s.
You did. I remember. However, it is. Wait, and once more, as the last link points out, Wikipedia is founded on the principle that an open system can produce quality, neutral, encyclopedic content. This principle may well be true, and it has certainly proved more or less true up till now. However, it is fatally dependent on the policy of no original research, which is preferably good policy, except that in turn is fatally dependent on the policy of reliable sources, which leads us straight to the arms of the foe. In general, the most reliable sources are peer-reviewed journals and books published in university presses, university-level textbooks, magazines, journals, and books published by respected publishing houses and mainstream newspapers. As a rule of thumb, the more people engage in checking facts and analyzing legal issues, scrutinizing the writing, the more reliable the publication. The second sentence is especially fascinating. It is perhaps the principal erroneous belief of modern democracy. If you believe that the more people believe X, the more likely X is to be true, you are demodist by definition. Demodists distrust anything individual, but especially individual decisions, which they hate like the devil hates garlic. The universal organization, I think it's a mixed metaphor. It's vampires that don't like garlic. The universal organization panacea of the 20th century society is the committee. No wonder its buildings were so ugly. Against the great tide of consensus, I have only two words. One is groupthink, and two is the word. And if you think citizendium is an even better idea, follow these two links. Paging Vector Lysenko, Trofim Lysenko to the white curtsy phone. I wish my case. So the goal of Revpedia is clear, produce a coherent picture of reality by selective external revision of Wikipedia. Revpedia does not edit, it audits, it digs as deeply into the facts as it needs to demonstrate the truth. It supplies whatever subjective perspective is necessary to convey the whole truth of the matter. It takes nothing for granted and it has no mercy. But by its very nature, auditing is not an open and unstructured process. If nothing else, it survives Conquest's second law. Revpedia must be explicitly reactionary. Since the masses fear and loathe the reaction and reactionaries the masses are not welcome. However, there is a small problem. To defeat WatchCorp, we must capture the support of the masses. Obviously, Revpedia is no private club. Anyone can read it. But can anyone write it? Yes, but in Revpedia, the distinction between editorial staff and mere users is clear. Nothing that presents itself as a truth machine can possibly succeed without some sort of crowdsourcing, but inviting the masses is one thing, surrendering to them is another. At first, the only people who will care about Revpedia are other reactionaries who will simply be happy to have a place to go where everyone agrees with them, as long as they're edited by reactionary administrators to prevent any progressive slippage. These readers will be just as valuable as Wikipedia's, and the community will grow in the same way, although it will, of course, be much smaller. Reaction is not for everyone, at least not at first. So Revpedia is much like a Wikipedia, but its source primarily is very different. First, no source which does not provide open online access is meaningful. A link to an ISBN number is garbage. You might as well say, I read it somewhere. If the source is not freely available, it cannot be publicly scrutinized, and it cannot contribute to an audit. Not only is this policy essential to any fair pursuit of truth, it benefits from the avalanche of pre-1922 content that Google has blessed us with. This lends a wonderful reactionary basis to the whole effort. 1922 is actually quite progressive by the standards of 1822, but it will do. Second, no source is trusted on the basis of authority, either personal or institutional. It can only be judged on its own merits. So what if people come to you with crackpot physics? I can't recognize crackpot physics, but any decent physicist can. There is no substitute for administrators. Third, all sources need to be mirrored so that the links don't break. Disk space is cheap, truth is expensive, as I said, real money. And finally, as Revpedia becomes influential, it will develop enemies. This is good. Adversaries are both a sign of success and of necessity for eventual victory. Revpedia greets them with flowers and invites them to contribute, but not, of course, without identifying themselves as such. Contributors to Revpedia come in two broad voluntary alignments, friends and opponents. Within these parties, an uber-factious design can create an arbitrarily deep and complex hierarchy of cults and clans. The presence of adversaries is essential to the production of truth. It demonstrates that all claims are tested. When you look at a Revpedia page, you can click a tab and see any or all hostile responses. Adversaries can and should develop editorial and administrative structure to make their responses as effective and convincing as possible. A situation in which edited content competes with alliterative drive by peanut gallery tons is not a fair fight. Ideally, in a healthy and successful ecology, the original Revpedia admins become just one faction among many, like any other faction. they may splinter. Progressives, Scientologists, creationists, Moonies, and all other nut jobs all come with their own revisions of reality. As long as an authentic reactionary perspective is available, it needs no special distinction. The truth has a still small voice of its own. If only you can hear it, you'll find yourself listening. As usual, I've registered the domain and will give it to anyone who is seriously interested. I think putting Malcolm Muggeridge in the middle is kind of like off-putting, because Malcolm Muggeridge doesn't deserve this to be the piece of meat between two Moldbug buns.
I don't know much to comment on that, but yeah, I'm going to admit this article bored me a lot. It was a lot about Wikipedia and stuff.
It was bored.
It was boring.
So remember what we said at the beginning, Logos. He was not going to actually tell us how to defeat the U.S. government.
Yeah.
So can we basically say it's Todd's law? Moldbug is always going to do the opposite of what he tells you?
I don't know about the opposite, but it's less than a coin toss as to whether Moldbug's going to keep his promise or not by the end of the article.
I know. Oh, it's just. I mean, it was whatever. I mean, just kind of long and drawn out. Oh, here we go. We're gonna have a subreddit logos. We'll do that next week. Any thoughts?
On what in particular?
I guess the whole thing. It kind of was everywhere.
It was everywhere. I mean, there was no really big themes. I was expecting like 2007, as we saw from the summaries. He split that up kind of into arcs. He had that little middle arc where he talked about like the Protestant thesis. He had the beginning arc where he's talking about the Iron Polygon. He had the ending arc where he's talking about neo-camoralism. I don't know what seems to be the arc for 2008. Right now, it's just a hodgepodge of random stuff. Like, he's going after libertarians, but I thought the articles in 2007 had more bite to them. Random stuff about Wikipedia. I'll be honest with you. I don't even remember what the article before the Wikipedia article talked about, because that Wikipedia article was like so long.
It was Ron Paul and.
Oh, that was still libertarians. Wow, everything just kind of blended together. Yeah, there's two articles about libertarians, right? There was one that was the letter to libertarians, and there was, I think, one more about libertarians, and there was the Wikipedia. I don't know. It all blended together. I don't know.
I got it. I think we figured out Moldbug's strategy for winning. He's gonna bore the elves to death so that they just don't do anything.
I don't know about that. I mean, I'm sure what Moldbug is writing about has an audience. I don't think it's boring in an objective sense. It's not a topic I care about. I'm not his audience for these issues. I care more about the political philosophy. And so when I was looking at these articles, I was just like, yeah, okay, I'm not a libertarian. I'm not somebody he's trying to convince from, quote, Beltway libertarianism to whatever Moldbug wants. And I'm not into Wikipedia and the history of like information gathering stuff. So it's just, yeah, it just didn't really hit it for me.
Well, I thought it was just boring and dull, because that's not how you don't bring down the government with a Wikipedia. What are you talking about? That's stupid.
Well, yeah, I mean, watch Wall Street, buy all the mods, and then just use all their money to find the tribe. Just pay for 24/7 round the clock, like Moldbug already said, right? Editing is more a contest of will. It's about who can outlast the other person in the editor wars. When you got a big corporation who can pay people around the clock to pitch a narrative, they'll be unbeatable, basically. I mean, here's a really good example of this. It'll come from left field, right? This just reminds me analogously about the battle between PewDiePie and T-Series. Eventually, T-Series wins because it's a giant corporation and PewDiePie can only do so much as a single subscriber, and so he's dethroned as the king of YouTube or whatever, right? It's that, but with Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, all right, guys, that's all we have for today, but we're back on our bread and butter, so till next time. It's Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fire podcast, signing off.